My daughter looked the nurse in the eye and said, "We're not responsible for him." Those 5 words. I heard them through the curtain they'd drawn around my bed, thin yellow fabric that did nothing to muffle the voices of my own blood. I lay there with a tube in my arm and a machine counting my heartbeats, and I thought, so this is what 68 years of living gets you. They didn't know I was awake. But before I tell you the rest, let me ask, where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments, because I have a feeling some of you already know exactly how this story goes. The pain woke me at 3 a.m., not the kind that announces itself, the quiet kind. A pressure behind my sternum, like someone had placed a brick on my chest while I slept and was slowly adding more weight. I remember trying to sit up. I remember the ceiling spinning. I remember the floor coming up to meet me faster than seemed fair. The next thing I knew was fluorescent light, the smell of something chemical, something that tries to be clean but isn't quite, and a young nurse with tired eyes writing something on a clipboard, not looking at me, not yet. "He's up," she said to someone I couldn't see. A doctor came in. Young man, maybe 40, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular kind of calm that doctors learn to put on like a coat. He told me his name was Dr. Farouk. He told me I'd had a cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but close enough that they'd called it a warning. He told me I'd been unconscious for 6 hours. I asked about my daughter, my son-in-law. He glanced at the nurse. That glance. The one where 2 people communicate a whole conversation without making a sound. "They were notified," he said. "They came briefly, earlier. Briefly." I turned the word over in my mind like a stone. How briefly? He adjusted his glasses, looked at the clipboard. "About 20 minutes. They spoke with the attending. And then..." He stopped, started again. "They indicated they had prior commitments." Prior commitments. My daughter had prior commitments while her father was unconscious in a hospital bed with a machine breathing for him. I didn't cry. I want you to understand that. I am not a man who cries easily. I grew up in a house where you handled things. You swallowed hard. You stood up straight. You kept moving. My father was that way. His father before him. It was the only inheritance that got passed down reliably in our family, so I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling tiles, and I counted the cracks, and I breathed slowly, and I thought about my wife, Isabel. Isabel passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. Though toward the last week she was barely there, just her hands were still her hands, still warm, still reaching. She was the one who held our family together, not with force, not with rules, with presence. She had a way of being in a room that made everything quieter and more manageable, like standing near still water. When she died, I thought my daughter would step into that space, not fill it, nothing fills it, but step near it. I thought grief would do that, draw us closer. I was wrong. The shift happened slowly, the way water gets into old walls. You don't see it, you just start noticing the damage. At first, it was small things. Phone calls that went to voicemail and weren't returned for days. Holiday dinners where my son-in-law checked his phone more than he talked. A birthday that passed. My 67th, without so much as a card, though I got a text at 9 p.m. that said, "Sorry, Dad forgot. Happy B-Day." I saved it. I don't know why. I still have it. Then came the money. My daughter called one evening, her voice soft in that particular way it gets when she wants something. The furnace needed replacing. $2,200. I wrote the check. 6 months later, the car payment. Then, the credit card. Then a loan she said was for a business her husband was starting. That one was $12,000. I gave it to her in 2 installments because that's what made sense to me. I wanted to see her succeed. I wanted to see them build something. The business never opened. I asked about it once, gently, at Thanksgiving. My son-in-law looked at his plate. My daughter changed the subject so smoothly I almost admired it. Almost. After that, I started noticing the pattern. The calls came when something was needed. The visits happened around money. My daughter had a gift for making you feel like the help she was asking for was actually for your benefit, like you were lucky to give it. I don't know how she learned that. She didn't learn it from her mother. The house was the thing that really told me where I stood. I've lived in my house for 31 years. Isabel and I bought it when our daughter was 4 years old. It's a brick colonial on the east side of Marietta, Georgia. 2 stories, a yard that backs up against a stand of old pines. Isabel L. planted climbing roses along the back fence. They still come up every June, coral and dense, even though she's been gone 4 years. I tend them. I don't entirely know why. I'm not a gardener by nature, but I tend them because they were hers. About 8 months ago, my daughter started asking questions about the house. Casual at first. What did I think it was worth these days? Had I thought about downsizing? There was a very nice senior community not far from where she lived. Had I considered it? She could help with the move. I told her I wasn't moving. The questions kept coming, just shaped differently each time. A cousin of her husband's was a real estate agent. Would I just talk to him, no obligation? The market was so good right now, I'd be leaving money on the table if I waited. And the house was a lot to maintain alone at my age, wasn't it? At my age, I was 68 years old, in reasonable health, with a full set of teeth and enough sense to balance my own checkbook. But there it was, at my age. I told her no, each time, no. And then came the night. I ended up on my own floor at 3 a.m., staring at my own ceiling with the brick on my chest. Lying in that hospital bed, listening to the machine count my heartbeats, I thought about what Dr. Farouk had said, prior commitments, and what the nurse told me the next morning when she came in early, before the shift changed, and she thought I was still asleep. I heard her talking quietly in the hallway with another nurse. The family came back, she said. Just the daughter and her husband. They were asking about his assets, whether there was a will on file. I lay very still. I told them that's not information we have. The other nurse said. They asked to speak with whoever handles that kind of thing, like he was already gone. I opened my eyes to the empty room. The monitor beeped. Outside the window, early Georgia light was coming through, pale and thin. The kind that doesn't commit to anything yet. I reached for my phone. My lawyer's name is Buford. We've known each other since we were young men at the same church, back when we both had more hair and fewer opinions. He's the kind of man who listens before he speaks, which I've always found to be an underrated quality. I called him at 7 in the morning, and he picked up on the second ring. Still breathing, I see, he said, because that's how we talk to each other. For now, I said, I need to see you. I'll come to you. He was there by 9. He came in with coffee from the place on Roswell Road that I like, which meant he'd stopped on the way, which meant he already understood this was serious. He sat in the chair beside the bed and he listened to everything. He didn't write anything down. He never does. He just listens. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, How long have you been watching this happen? A while, I said. And you didn't call me. I kept thinking it would change. He nodded slowly, the way he does when he's not going to argue with you, but wants you to know he has thoughts about the matter. All right, he said. Here's what we're going to do. What we did, I won't lay out in every detail, but I will tell you that when my daughter and son-in-law arrived at the hospital that afternoon, that second visit, the one where they came looking like concern and smelling like agenda, I was ready. They came in with expressions I recognized. That careful architecture of worry that's really just worry about one particular thing, arranged to look like it's about you. My daughter held my hand. Her hand was cold. Daddy, she said, you scared us. I looked at her. This woman I had held when she was hours old, so small I was afraid to breathe wrong. This person I had driven to volleyball practice and helped with geometry and sat beside at her mother's funeral. I looked at her and I thought, when did you become someone I don't recognize? Did I? I said. My son-in-law stood near the window, hands in his pockets. He had his phone in one hand. I could see the outline of it. He glanced at the monitor, then at the room in general. the way men do when they're calculating. We were thinking, my daughter said, her thumb moving over my knuckles, that when you get out, it might be good to have a conversation about the future, about what makes the most sense for everyone. For everyone. I've already had that conversation, I said. She tilted her head. What do you mean? With Beaufort. He came this morning. Something moved across her face, controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. Oh, she said. Well, it's good to have things in order. It is, I agreed. Everything's in order now. My son-in-law shifted near the window. I saw his jaw tighten. So what does that mean, exactly? He asked, not looking at me. It means what it means, I said. My affairs are handled. They stayed another 40 minutes. We talked about nothing, the weather, a show they were watching, whether I was eating enough. The kind of conversation that happens on the surface of a much larger conversation no one is willing to have out loud. When they left, my daughter kissed my forehead. Her lips were cool and barely there. I watched the door close behind them. Then I called Beaufort back. They came, I said. I know, he said. How do you feel? Like I made the right call. You did, he said, and that was that. I was in the hospital for 4 more days. On the 3rd day, a social worker came by. Young woman, earnest, with a lot of printed materials about cardiac recovery and home safety. She asked if I had family support at home. I told her I had a neighbor who checked in. A man named Alvin across the street, retired, widower. We've been looking out for each other for years. She seemed satisfied with that. She didn't ask about my daughter. I didn't bring her up. What happened in those 4 days, in the practical sense, was this. Beaufort handled the documents. My will was rewritten. The house, the savings, the policy. None of it would go where my daughter had been quietly assuming it would go. Instead, it would go to a scholarship fund at the high school, where Isabel had taught English for 22 years. Beaufort knew a board member. The paperwork moved quickly. I also changed the locks. That needs some explanation. My daughter had a key to my house. She'd had one for years, given in good faith, given in the spirit of in case of emergency. I thought about all the times she'd used it, and I thought about what she and her husband had been planning, and I changed the locks. I called Alvin and gave him the new key instead. He didn't ask questions. He just took the key and put it on his key ring and said, "You need anything else, you let me know." That's the kind of man Alvin is. On the morning of my discharge, I sat in the chair near the window and I wrote a letter. I've written a lot of letters in my life. I wrote letters to Isabel when we were young and couldn't afford phone calls. I wrote letters to my mother every Sunday until she passed. I believe in letters, in the physical, deliberate act of putting words on paper where they can't be argued away or misremembered. This letter was different from any I'd written before. I didn't write it in anger. I want to be clear about that. I moved through the anger in those 4 days. Moved through it like a house, room by room, opening windows. What was left on the other side wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't bitterness either. It was something clearer, something like knowing. I wrote to my daughter. I told her I loved her. I told her I'd loved her from the first moment, and that would never change, because that kind of love doesn't have conditions, even when it should. I told her I understood that somewhere along the way she had started to see me primarily as a resource. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and she deserved the truth more than she deserved protection from it. I told her about the scholarship fund. I told her it would help students who wanted to be teachers, because her mother had been a teacher and had been extraordinary at it, and that seemed like the right way to carry Isabel's name forward. I told her the house would go to a land trust that preserved historic properties. I'd looked into it. The roses along the back fence would be documented and maintained. That detail mattered to me. I told her that if she ever wanted to call me, not to ask for anything, just to talk, just to be my daughter the way she used to be before money got between us, I would answer. I folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. I addressed it to her name, her childhood name, the one I'd called her from the beginning, and I left it on the bed when the nurse came to discharge me. The cab ride home was quiet. It was a Tuesday in March, the sky that flat gray that can't decide what it wants to do. We passed the high school on the way. I asked the driver to go that way on purpose. The marquee out front said something about spring drama auditions. I thought about Isabel grading papers in that building for 2 decades, staying late, staying later, pouring herself into other people's children because that's what she believed in. I thought she would have known exactly what to do in a situation like this. She always did. The house was the same when I got back. Of course it was. Houses don't register what's happened to the people inside them. The porch light was on. Alvin must have turned it on, and the mail had been brought in and was stacked neatly on the kitchen table. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just standing, feeling the particular quiet of a house that has been empty for a few days. Then I put my bag down, and I went out back and I checked on the roses. It was too early in the season for them. Just bare canes and old leaves, but they were there. Still there. That was enough. 3 days later, my phone rang. My daughter. I looked at the screen for a moment. I answered. "I got your letter," she said. "I know." A long pause. "Daddy, you don't have to say anything right now," I said. "I'm not asking you to. I just want you to read it a few more times. Really read it." Another pause. "The scholarship fund," she said. "Mom's name is going to be on it. Isabel J. Morrison Memorial Scholarship. Starting this fall." I heard something on the other end that might have been a sharp breath. Might have been something else. "She would have liked that," my daughter said quietly. "Yes," I said. "She would have." We didn't talk much longer. I didn't push it. Some doors, when they've been closed a long time, don't open all at once. You ease them. You wait. What I know now, sitting in my kitchen in Marietta with a cup of coffee and the morning light coming through the window, is that I am not the man who went down on his own floor at 3 a.m. and woke up afraid. I am not the man who handed over check after check hoping it would buy something you can't buy. I am not the man who lay behind a yellow curtain listening to his daughter tell a nurse he wasn't her responsibility. I am the man who got up. The roses will come back in June. They always do. Coral and dense, climbing the back fence the same way they have for 31 years, whether anyone is watching or not. I'll be here to see them.